things happened in real life are always variable, can always be refused by someone else, can always be rectified by someone else or by a new discovery if we are talking about historical facts, for instance, and all that, and even things that that happened a while ago are very difficult to reconstruct immediately after they've already happened. But you said, I mean, the classical argument between a married couple said, but you said 20 minutes ago, you said, no, I didn't say that. You know, no, what I said was something different, and of course, unless you're recording all the time, but even if you're recording nowadays, people can say, no, I didn't say that. And then the only things that can be fully told without rectification, without the possibility of someone saying, no, that's not the way it was, is fiction. It's fictional things. The fiction is invented by someone, and then you say, well, of course, this is fiction. These people never existed. Don Quixote never existed. Okay, but Don Quixote died, and nobody can say he did not die. Nobody can come, oh no, or he didn't die when Cervantes said, yes, he died when Cervantes said. Cervantes was the author. And that's the only thing that cannot ever be refused. And sometimes I think we need to have that in order to be able to tell now and then something fully and once and for all. Because the rest of our lives, the rest of historical facts, the rest, battles, wars, everything can be nuanced, can be rectificated, can be refuted, can be, historians are never in agreement about anything. Of course, about the main facts, yes, but not about the details. So everything can be changed, and we can never tell fully and once and for all anything of actual, real life. Only in fiction can we tell a whole story which is that way, once and for all, and fully told, fully as far as the author decides to tell this and not that.
So when it comes down to not fact, but I mean, if we talk about politics, history and literature, the truth lies in literature?
Some kind of truth. Of course, it's not the truth. But it's not a lie either. I'm very surprised, for instance, that Vargas Llosa, the Peruvian, he's a colleague of mine at the Real Academia Española as well, and I admire his work very much, but he wrote a book years ago, an essay called La Verdad de las Mentiras, the Truth of Lies, talking about mentiras. But mentiras I don't think is an acceptable lies, and it's not an acceptable word for fiction, because a lie is always regarding something which is the truth, and there is no truth previous to a fiction, and then fiction creates its own world, as it were, and then it belongs more to invention than to lies. Word lies, I think, is inappropriate in that case. So a certain kind of truth is in fiction. It's not the truth, of course, because to begin with, we're talking, if it's real fiction, we're talking about people who never existed, a story that never happened, and sometimes I say, well, I remember that many people, when they get old or older, I remember, for instance, the French-Romanian philosopher Cioran. He said that the older he got, the less interested he was in reading fiction or novels, and more interested in reading diaries, autobiographies, memoirs, and things like that, because he couldn't stand anymore things that never existed, people who never existed, or things that never happened, which I can understand to a certain extent. That as you get older, maybe, but at the same time, you are, of course, if you read an autobiography, everything is refutable, and everything is going to be very, very subjective on the part of the author. And if you read memoirs, the same thing. And even if you read a biography, it's an objective biography. It's very difficult to know exactly what was in somebody's mind during a whole lifetime, or things like that. And then in a fiction, of course, you don't have the truth about anyone because those people never existed, but you have some kind of truth. That's what I can say about that.
Are you happier when you are in your fictional world?
Yeah, you rest in fiction. You have some rest in fiction. It's a good rest from the real world, besides other things. But you say, oh well, I remember when I was writing my 3-volume novel, Your Face Tomorrow. Of course, it was a big effort. It took me about 8.5 years to write the whole thing. Then I finished the first volume. I published it in 2002. Then the second volume came out in 2004. And at a given moment, before starting the third volume, which happened to be the longest one of the 3, on the one hand, of course, I felt tired and lazy about the task awaiting me. But at a given moment I said, yeah, I'm going to go back to this world with these people who don't exist, but they calm me down, they make me happier, they make me happier for a while every day. I mean, I don't work very long. Each day, 3-4 hours, not more than that, when I'm writing a novel. But during 3 or 4 hours I shall be with these people who never existed, but seem real to me, and maybe shall seem real to the readers when they are able to read the novel. And I feel at ease, and I rest there. It's a resting place. Not a final resting place, but a resting place.
I figured we might speak a little about something we touched upon yesterday, which is that Bertha Isla and as thus Bad Begins play out in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And
recent past.
In a recent past, but in a past.
Mm-hmm.
And you had some reasons for this that I would like you to...
Yes, well, I didn't have a reason, really. It came afterwards, after I wrote them. It's not that I thought of doing that on account of that reason, but after I wrote them, I realized that I had written my latest 2 novels in the past, whereas most of the others, ever since, I don't know, The Man of Feeling, published in 1986, for instance, to Los Enamoramientos, The Infatuations in English, which was published in 2011 in Spain. All of them took place contemporarily. You know, I was writing in the 1990s, and the action took place in the 1990s, etc. And then I realized that in these 2 latest novels, I had gone to 1980 in the case of Thus Bad Begins, and to a period of time between 1969 and 1994 or 5 in Bertha Isla. And I thought, why did I do this? I mean, that's a little strange, because that was not my custom. And I thought maybe because the world has changed a lot in the last 20 years or so, in the 21st century, in fact. And people are very different. It seems you don't always notice that, because of course you go day by day and everything seems the same, but it's not the same. And I realized that the kind of characters, the kind of problems, the kind of ambiguities, the kind of complexities, the kind of dilemmas that I'm interested in, maybe wouldn't be believable in 2017, which is when Bertha Isla was published in Spanish, or 2018, doesn't matter, because people are different, people are more superficial. And perhaps if I had given that story in present day, maybe the readers would have said, people are not like that anymore. People don't care about this kind of thing, or they don't worry about this kind of thing. Of course, these are generalizations which are always stupid, and of course there are all kinds of people. But, you know, within making an unfair generalization, I would say, and the funny thing is that it's not only young people. I think that it affects all people of all ages. To put a very simple and foolish example, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 years ago, you would never see a man in his 70s with short pants, how do you call them? Shorts, with shorts and with a mobile phone making photographs to anything, really, practically anything. You wouldn't see that. There was a different way of being in the world. There was a sense of modesty, in a way, you could say, or sobriety, that seems to have been lost in the last 20 years or so. And that affects also the moral ambiguities, the moral complexities, the moral dilemmas, as I said, that many people nowadays wouldn't even want to hear about that. And I thought, a posteriori, I don't know if you say that in English, a posteriori I thought maybe that's why. Maybe if the action of the novels took place in 2017 or 18, it wouldn't just be believable, it wouldn't be what the French call vraisemblable, or we call verosimil. I don't think in English there is an exact word for that. Believable, likely. It would seem unlikely. But I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not. That was, if it was a reason, it was not a decision that I made before I started.
Maybe the term ambiguity is what is really lost in these days, that you can have intentions that are not at all clear, either to yourself or to other people, that are good or bad or in between, which is much about what your novel's about. Now what you preferably can be is a victim of somebody's actions.
Yes, I think so. And there is also something rather new in my opinion now too, is that people are not aware of their own contradictions anymore. They contradict themselves and they say something and the contrary at the same time, and they seem not to realize that they're saying one thing and it's contrary, which is amazing to me. And if you don't see contradiction, if you are unable to see contradiction, you can't see ambiguity either, or you cannot accept ambiguity. The fact that we are complicated people, that we may be good and bad, to use very simple terms, at the same time, or good for some things and bad for others, or you may be tempted to do something which you know is wrong and still do it, etc., etc. And people don't seem to accept that anymore. At the same time, they do that sort of thing, and precisely because they do it, they don't accept their own contradictions sometimes, which is something strange, because as far as I recall, I was born in 1951, so I haven't lived too long, but during my lifetime, people were never like that. They realized what a contradiction was. They realized what a paradox was. They accepted that we are complicated and ambiguous, that there were choices. Now everything seems to be stated beforehand. You must do this, you must accept that, you must... and everything is arguable. Everything is arguable. Everything is, well, yes, but maybe not, or yes, maybe I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway, and in my case, because I'm a complex person, a complicated person, and that seems not acceptable anymore in some senses.
Perhaps especially in Spain with your history, which also seeps into Thus Bad Begins, there is an ambiguity born into the politics, because you came out of a civil war and went into a dictatorship,
Yeah, a long one.
And a long one of 40 years, and then you sort of gently rode into democracy without the big fight about who did what. So there's a lot.
And without a bloodshed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there must be, I mean, there should be, one would think that exactly in Spain, ambiguity would be...
Yeah, it used to be like that for, I don't know, maybe for the first 20, 25, maybe 30 years after Franco's death, after the end of the dictatorship. People realized that, well, it was worthwhile to renounce to a few things and gain others, that not everything wishable was to be fulfilled, that there was pragmatism in a way. You say, well, let's see, we renounce to this and that, but we get this and this and this. And in the case of Spain, we gained a lot because we didn't have bloodshed. There were some episodes with bloodshed, but just a few. And of course, people don't, young people now, some young people who are saying that the whole transition, as it were, from dictatorship to democracy was some kind of farce or treason or surrender or things like that. They really don't know how things were, and they don't. They seem to believe that the world or the country has always been like it is now. They have a series of rights. They were born with these rights, and they give them for granted. But it was not like that. I mean, in 1975, we still didn't have free speech. We didn't have free press. We didn't have divorce. We didn't have political parties. They were banned. We didn't have elections ever. There was a single party, the way dictatorships have. And of course, women, for instance, not in the practice, but in the theory, they even needed their husbands or their father's permission to get a job and things like that, or to have a passport, which is incredible, but it was like that. In the practice, it was not like that, because most people in general were much more civilized. Much more civilized than the law, Franco's law was. So it didn't happen, but in the theory and according to law, women needed that for things as simple as open a bank account as well. I don't know if that lasted to the very end, to 1975, but certainly in the 50s and early 60s it was still like that. And then we gained all those things, and all those things that younger people give for granted, and they think, oh, how is it possible that nobody killed Franco, as if it had been easy? And there were some attempts to do it. Of course, they were hidden by the censorship. We had censorship as well. And there were some attempts, in fact, but nobody knows very much about them because, of course, they were concealed. But how is it possible that the country was so cowardly that they didn't dethrone? Do you know what a dictatorship is? No, they don't. They think, oh, well, we would have done it. No, you wouldn't.
Do you think that this, I mean, there have been then a lot of people who have been actual victims of the dictatorship, including your own father, but who had a different kind of approach to the term of being a victim?
Yes, I think so. For a long time, I think that the people who had been, well, many were victims and couldn't say anything because they were dead. They had been killed during the war or after the war. Immediately after the war, there were many executions, and many people who were really killed when the war was already over. But the people who survived, as it were, for a long time, many of them didn't talk about it very much, not even in private. In private, you could talk. That's true. In Spain, people always talked. It seems that in East Germany, they didn't. but in Spain, people, you know, you live outdoors, you go to the cafes and to the bars, and people talks. And unless you were very unlucky and a policeman in disguise was sitting at the table next to you, well, you could openly speak and say anything, and it was not very important. You didn't live with that kind of fear. But, of course, publicly you couldn't say anything. But in private, yes. But even in private, many of those people who were victims didn't talk much about that. They had a sense of shame, in a way. They had a sense also of pride, you could say as well, because they had been humiliated, because they had been retaliated, etc., etc. That seemed something certainly unfair to do, but something that you had suffered, and people didn't like talking about their own sufferings. There was some kind of modesty also. There was not this exhibition of victimization that you have nowadays, even from false victims. But the real victims of those days didn't talk much about that, not even privately. They knew what had happened to them, they knew perfectly well, probably they didn't forget, probably they didn't forgive innerly. Of course they couldn't do anything because they were still under a long dictatorship, but they didn't talk very much about that. There was some sort of a mixture of shame and pride, I would say, that made them not mention that very often.
So if you were to describe now as Javier Marías, who writes columns in El País, what is Spain today? I mean, compared to this Spain that you talk about, the more, I would almost say dignified, but at least more modest Spain.
Yeah, more dignified and more modest, of course, much worse too. You know, in some senses, I'm not the kind of person who thinks that all pastime was better, and everything in many aspects it was much worse. And of course, all in all, I think that Spain has improved immensely, thanks partly to the so-called transition, thanks to that pact of non-aggression after Franco's death, and nobody goes to trial. Let's forget what happened on both sides, and certainly what the dictatorship did. They did much more than the other side, because they had 40 years to do whatever they wanted to, whereas the others only had 3, and only in half the country, half of Spain. But in many aspects, I think it's a much better country, of course, and I don't see many differences between nowadays Spain and nowadays Italy or France or Germany or Britain or probably Denmark. I don't see many differences, whereas in the 1960s or 70s differences were huge, always for the worse in Spain, always for the worse. And so in that sense, we are normalized. You could say Spain has been an anomalous country for too many years, and now it's normal. It's just one more European country, democratic one, even if some people are saying now, no, this is a false democracy, and the fact that there is a monarchy makes it some sort of dictatorship too, which is ridiculous, because you should say the same thing about Denmark and Britain and Holland and so many countries that have constitutional monarchies and parliamentary monarchies, and they are, and some republics are dictatorships, in fact. So the idea, some people now think, no, nothing but a republic is a real democracy. Is it? Well, yeah, I don't know, Cuba is probably a republic, and I don't think it's very free or very democratic. So those are foolish things that you hear nowadays. But I think that the monarchy is not so bad. I mean, I've never been a monarchic myself in the theory. But given the way Spain is, I think that it's better to have a king who has no powers, because he really doesn't have any power, than to have a president of the republic, because a president of a republic in Spain would be respected by no one. Absolutely no one. Everyone would be insulting him or her. Everyone would be saying terrible things, and it would be a politician. And I can't think of any politician that would could do that job satisfactorily to most of the Spaniards. And well, these kings, maybe some other kings would be horrible, but these kings, Juan Carlos, now Felipe, they do their job very well. They are dignified people. They know exactly what their limits are. They never intrude in anything. And at the same time, they are the chief of state, and which is just a figure which is somehow more or less respected by everyone, somehow more or less, always less and less, but somehow still a bit more than any politician would be as a president of the republic. So I've never been monarchic myself, but I think, well, in Spain and the way Spaniards are, I think it's better to have this than a republic at present.
Would you say that what is happening in Catalonia is part of this democratic, I mean that Spain now is like every other European country, and therefore Catalonia now can have their separatist movement, and this is all normal within the democracy?
Well, the fallacy of this independentist Catalan movement is proven by the simple fact that in many European countries, democratic European countries, something like that wouldn't be allowed. I mean, they have a constitution prohibiting openly parties wanting to divide the country or wanting to separate from the country. That's not allowed, I think, not even in Germany. And the fact is that in Spain they are allowed too, as long as they are not violent, but all ideas are accepted and all movements, and you can fight for it. That's legitimate. Of course, fight for it without violence. And that's the proof, the final proof of the fallacy. These independentists are saying, oh, Spain's not a real democracy, it is a continuation of Franco's regime. They're talking about the regime of 1978, which was the year of the Constitution. You know, the word regime is associated to Francoism, and they use that word to diminish our democracy. But the fact that they are doing that and nobody is, I mean, the people who are in jail, the Catalan politicians who are in jail, are not in jail because they are defending independentismo. That's perfectly legitimate, but because they did something else. And they declared unilaterally a Catalan republic. Can you imagine that in Germany? And on the other hand, or Catalonia or the Basque Country or any Spanish so-called autonomy, they have more power, more autonomous powers than the German Länder. More. They have their own police. They of course they have their own language, they have their institutions, they have a parliament, they have a parliament that depends on the Spanish state, of course, facilitated by the Spanish democracy. They are the Spanish state in Catalonia. It's ridiculous because they have rebelled against exactly what allows them to exist. And they are the representatives of the Spanish state in Catalonia. So they are state, they are also state. It's quite an absurd thing, but there is a lot of ill will, a lot of slander, and a lot of lies on the part of these people. And I personally respect absolutely those independentistas, you know. And I think there's nothing wrong in wanting, I don't know, I'm not a great fan of my country. I don't like Spain very much. So I perfectly understand that people may want to separate from Spain. But not with these people. I mean, I think these people, the way they are doing it, I think is very bad for Catalans themselves. And I think that their position is almost a fascist position. And then if I were Catalan, I would be very frightened by these people wanting to make a Catalan state. I wouldn't like to be one of their subjects, because they would be subjects, I'm sure of that. Not citizens, subjects.
Why are you not particularly fond of Spain?
Oh, I see. It's a country full of flaws and full of. I like a few things from my country, and I dislike many things from it as well. And sometimes I find it's a ridiculous country and rather coarse. Very often it's coarse and also corny at the same time. Both things together sometimes. And I don't know. Many times I have been told, "You don't seem a real Spaniard," as a praise. And I've noticed that they used to say it as a praise. I said, "Well, okay, thank you." I'm not against my country either, but I'm not particularly fond of it. I see it has a complicated history with good things and also very bad things, and there is something in the character. Of course, the common place is that the national sin in Spain is envy, and unfortunately, I don't know if it's the national sin, but it's very much. You find it very often.
Like envidia.
Yeah, envidia. And that you find very much, and what is called mala leche. I don't know how to say that in English. Ill will. There's a lot of ill will. Not in everyone, of course. There are magnificent people in Spain, but they are terrible people too. They can be terrible.
Could you, in Thus Bad Begins, it is said that the Spanish Civil War, because it was a civil war, still is alive in Spain.
Yeah. You can read in the papers now they're talking, these days they are talking about taking Franco's body somewhere else instead of in that. Yeah, I mean, if you come to think of it, you say, yeah, there is a big monument and he's buried there, but it's a monument that, I don't know, nobody goes there, or maybe a few nostalgic Francoists and maybe a few tourists. I've never been there. Now I think that remains of people should be left where they are. Even if it's a soldier, should be left where he fell. I would say that. For instance, I don't know what happens in Spain with remains and with bodies, because all the time they are digging and digging and digging to see if they find García Lorca's remains all the time. And the family, García Lorca's family, doesn't want it. But the problem is that he was buried together, apparently he was buried together with two other people who were shot at the same time. And the families of these two people, or three people, I don't know, they want the remains of their ancestors to be unburied and properly reburied or whatever. But the Lorca family doesn't want to move them and doesn't want to find them, and it's something about which I've written a column or two, I think, and I say, well listen, this is not clear. This is not totally clean either. I think that politicians want to do that in order to make some sort of touristic visiting place. Now we know where the remains of García Lorca are, and well, let's make something not like the monument for Franco, but more modest, I suppose, but so that people can go visit, get moved, thinking that they are in front of Lorca's remains. No big thing. Remains don't mean a big thing to me. I think it doesn't matter what happens to remains, in my opinion. But in Spain, all the time, they are talking about that, about moving people's bodies, and which seems like a rather religious thing in the end, because they did that with saints or with supposed saints in the Middle Age and later on. And they moved, and there are those relics, you know, in churches, and say this is the hand of Saint John the Baptist. Can't you see this is a lamb's limb? Because sometimes it's obvious that it's animals, you know. No. People want to believe things, and then if they want to believe that somehow Lorca himself could stay in his remains, to me it's absurd and ridiculous. But I don't know, something happens with Spaniards and remains.
Maybe that is
and relics.
Yeah, maybe that is actually a good starting point for the imaginary life. I mean, for if it's all like that, it's who knows if it's real or not real.
No, I think it's rather that they don't want the past to be past.
Oh,
ever. There is a great incapacity to leave the past be past, which is something that all of us should do sometime or other. I think so. That's my personal opinion. I agree that there are things that shouldn't be forgotten. It's necessary to know that the Holocaust took place and everything, and that shouldn't be forgotten. But at the same time, to insist upon the same thing once and again and again and again, I don't think that's very healthy, either in personal life or in collective life. And in Spain, there is this tendency, the past, let us not the past be past. I think the past should be past to a certain extent, at least sometime.